What would you do if you found out the quiet, raggedy-dressed kid mopping your hotel lobby at midnight was the reason your entire family hadn't fallen apart? I want you to think about that question for a second. Because this story, this real gut-punching story, is about a boy nobody looked at twice. A boy who clocked in, kept his head down, and never once asked for a thank you. And the night a powerful woman discovered what he'd been doing in secret, she didn't just break down. She had to completely rethink everything she thought she knew about who deserved to be seen. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that you hear this. So let's go. Brenna Caldwell Holt was the kind of woman who ran a room before she even walked into it. 53 years old, black, sharp-featured, with silver-streaked locks pulled back tight, and a posture that said, "I have never once been caught off guard." She was the general manager of the Hargrove Grand, a four-star hotel in downtown Memphis, Tennessee, and she had been for 11 years. She knew every corner of that building, or at least, she thought she did. The Hargrove Grand wasn't just any hotel. It was the kind of place where politicians held private dinners, where brides spent 6 months on a waiting list for the ballroom, where the lobby chandeliers were cleaned by hand, one crystal at a time. Brenna had built its reputation from a 2-star wreck into something worth being proud of. She had fired incompetent managers, rebuilt the kitchen staff twice, and personally apologized to a senator's wife at 2 in the morning when housekeeping left the wrong turned-down chocolates. She did not take shortcuts. She did not tolerate excuses. And she did not, under any circumstances, miss things. That was what made the night of October 14th so difficult to process. It started with a camera. The Hargrove Grand had installed new security cameras 2 months earlier. Sharper resolution, wider angles, better low-light performance. The IT vendor had been in and out, running updates, and during one of those updates, Brenna's assistant had flagged a clip from the third-floor service corridor. Not because anything was obviously wrong, just because the timestamp was strange. 2:47 a.m., a Wednesday. Brenna was at her desk the next morning, coffee going cold beside her laptop, when she pulled up the footage. The corridor was dim, lit only by the emergency strip lighting along the baseboards. A cart sat near the supply closet. Mops, bucket, cleaning solution, and crouched beside it, with his back against the wall, was a boy. He looked maybe 16. Small frame, dark skin, wearing the gray uniform of the hotel's overnight janitorial staff, the kind of uniform 2 sizes too big, the sleeves rolled up. He had his knees pulled to his chest and a phone in his lap, the screen glowing against his face. He wasn't texting. He was reading something. Whatever it was, he wasn't moving. Just sitting there in that dark hallway at 2:47 in the morning, completely still, like he had nowhere else to be. Brenna leaned forward. She checked the clock-in records. His name was tagged to the 3rd floor that night. Tobias Webb, age 17, overnight janitorial, shift end 11 p.m., 11 p.m. And this footage was from 2:47 a.m., nearly 4 hours after his shift ended. Brenna set her coffee down. She pulled his file. Tobias Webb, 17. Hired 8 weeks ago through the city's youth employment program, a pipeline Brenna had personally approved to give teenagers from lower-income zip codes real work experience before graduation. Most of the kids lasted a semester. They showed up, learned the basics, moved on. Tobias had been quiet, punctual, and completely unremarkable on paper. His supervisor, a heavyset man named Glen, who managed the overnight cleaning crew, had written in his last check-in note, "Good worker, keeps to himself, no complaints, no complaints." 4 hours past his shift, and he was still in her building. Brenna pulled up the camera archives. Not just that Wednesday. She went back 6 weeks. What she found made her go still in a way she hadn't in years. Night after night, Tobias clocked out on time, and night after night he stayed. Not always in the same spot. Sometimes the 3rd floor corridor, sometimes the stairwell between floors 2 and 4, sometimes a tucked corner of the basement break room. Always quiet, always reading, or sitting with his eyes closed, or, and this was the part that stopped her cold, sometimes with his head resting against the wall, clearly asleep. He wasn't vandalizing anything. He wasn't stealing. He wasn't even using hotel resources beyond the emergency lighting that was always on regardless. He was just staying. Brenna sat back in her chair. Why? She thought about calling Glen Puffett in immediately. Thought about pulling Tobias in herself. But something, some instinct she'd spent 30 years in hospitality sharpening, told her to wait. Watch. Find out what she was actually looking at before she said a word. So she kept watching. It was a Thursday, almost 2 weeks later, when she finally saw it. She'd set an alert on the camera system. Her IT guy owed her a favor, so that anytime the third-floor service corridor registered motion after midnight, she'd get a notification on her phone. That Thursday, the alert came in at 1:15 a.m. Brenna was awake. She was always awake late. It was one of the hazards of running a hotel. She pulled up the live feed on her laptop. Tobias was in the corridor again. But this time he wasn't sitting still. He was on his phone, speaking quietly, too quietly for the audio to pick up clearly. He had a small insulated bag with him, the kind you'd use to carry a lunchbox. He was pacing slowly, the way someone paces when they're trying to stay calm during a difficult phone call. Then he stopped. He crouched down, set the bag on the floor, and opened it. Inside, wrapped in foil, was food. She could see steam rising faintly when he unwrapped it. A container of something. Rice, it looked like. Maybe something else alongside it. He repacked it carefully, zipped the bag, and stood. He looked at his phone for a long moment. Then he walked to the service elevator and went down. Brenna switched cameras. Basement level. Tobias stepped off the elevator and moved quickly through the back corridor, the one that ran behind the loading dock, the one that very few people outside operations ever walked through, and pushed open the exterior door. The camera outside caught him for only a few seconds before he moved out of frame. But in those seconds, she saw where he was going. Across the narrow alley behind the hotel was a parking structure. Old, city-owned, half-abused after midnight. And tucked into the ground floor alcove of that structure, barely visible from the street, was a woman. She was old, white-haired, wrapped in a heavy coat, even though October in Memphis was still mild. She was sitting on a flattened cardboard box, and when she saw Tobias, she raised one hand in a small wave. Tobias crossed the alley, sat down beside her, and handed her the food. Brenna watched them. The camera angle was poor, too far, too dark, but she could see them talking. Tobias leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The woman eating slowly and nodding at whatever he was saying. At one point, she reached over and patted his hand. He stayed with her for 40 minutes. Then he went back inside, took the service elevator back to 3, sat down in his usual spot in the corridor, and went to sleep with his back against the wall. Brenna closed her laptop. She sat in the dark of her office for a long time. The next morning, she asked Glen Puffett to come in. Glen was a big man, late 40s, with a graying goatee and the energy of someone who'd worked the overnight shift for so long he'd started treating 6 a.m. like other people treated noon. He sat across from Brenna's desk with his hands folded and a slightly wary expression. The expression of a man who'd been called into a GM's office before and knew it could go several ways. "Tell me about Tobias Webb," Brenna said. Glen relaxed slightly. "Good kid. Real good kid, actually. Quiet. Does what he's told. Doesn't complain. Never calls out. Why? He's been staying in the building after his shift." Glen blinked. "Staying how?" "Sleeping in the service corridor on 3, regularly." A long pause. "You didn't know," Brenna said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Glen said slowly. "I didn't." He rubbed his jaw. "He lives over on the east side, right? Takes 2 buses to get here. I don't have his home address in front of me." "I do," Glen said. "Because I looked it up when we hired him, because the program coordinator mentioned he had a long commute, and I wanted to make sure the schedule worked." He paused. "Last bus east runs at 11:40. If he misses it, there's nothing until 5 a.m. Brenna looked at him. "His shift ends at 11, Glen said quietly. "And sometimes runs late," Brenna said. "If the floors aren't done." Glen put both hands flat on his desk. "Lord, there's something else," Brenna said. She turned her laptop around and showed him the parking structure footage. Glen watched in silence. When it ended, he sat back. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, who is she? I don't know yet, Brenna said, but I'm going to find out. It took her 2 days and 3 conversations with the city's outreach coordinator for the unhoused population in the downtown district. Her name was Luella Marsh, 71 years old. She had lived in Memphis her entire life, raised 3 children in a house on Valentine Avenue, worked 22 years at a dry cleaning business that closed when its owner retired, lost her apartment 18 months ago when her landlord sold the building, and her fixed income couldn't cover the new rents. She had a daughter somewhere, the coordinator wasn't sure where, and a son who'd moved to Atlanta years ago and fallen out of contact. She'd been sleeping in the parking structure alcove for about 4 months. Is she known to our outreach team? Brenna asked. Yes, the coordinator said. She's on the list for transitional housing. There's a wait list. How long? A pause. Could be 6 months. Could be a year. Brenna thanked her and hung up. She sat with that information for a while. Then she pulled up Tobias Webb's youth program intake form and read through it properly for the first time. Emergency contact. Doreen Webb, grandmother. Address, same as applicant. She read further. The intake coordinator had written a note, the kind of brief background annotation they included for context. Applicant lives with grandmother. Parents not in picture. Home situation stable but financially limited. Highly motivated. Strong character reference from school counselor. Highly motivated. Brenna thought about a 17-year-old boy, riding 2 buses to get to a night shift at a hotel, mopping floors until 11 o'clock, and then, instead of sleeping in the corridor and heading home at 5, crossing an alley in the middle of the night to sit with an old woman and make sure she had something warm to eat. She thought about how nobody had told him to do that. No program, no supervisor, no incentive. She thought about the fact that he'd never mentioned it to anyone. She called Glen Puffett. Tell him I want to see him, she said. Tomorrow morning, my office. And Glen, don't tell him why. And don't make it sound like he's in trouble. Is he? Glen asked. Brenna looked out her office window at the Memphis skyline. No, she said. He is absolutely not in trouble. Tobias Webb arrived at Brenna's office the next morning at 8:45, 15 minutes early. He was in his school clothes, dark jeans, a plain navy hoodie, clean sneakers that had seen better days. He was shorter than she'd expected from the camera footage. Slim, with close-cropped hair and eyes that were very steady for someone who'd just been summoned to the general manager's office. Tobias, Brenna said. Have a seat. He sat, folded his hands in his lap. Waited. Brenna had run hundreds of these kinds of meetings over the years. She'd fired people, promoted people, delivered bad news and good news and news that landed somewhere complicated in between. She had a process. She usually started with small talk to settle the room, built to the point, covered her bases. She skipped all of it. She turned her laptop around and showed him the parking structure footage. She watched his face. He didn't panic. He didn't look caught. He just looked, for one very brief moment, like someone who had been carrying something quiet and private and had just felt it shift. That's Ms. Luella, he said. Yes, Brenna said. I know. He looked at the laptop, then back at her. Waiting. How long, she asked. He thought about it. 6 weeks, maybe. Since about a week after I started. How did you meet her? I was taking out the trash from the loading dock, he said. She was in the alcove. It was raining. She asked if I had any water. He paused. I didn't have water, but I had my dinner. I hadn't eaten it yet. I gave it to her. And then you kept coming back, yes, ma'am. With food, the kitchen throws a lot away, he said carefully. Not defensive, just factual. At the end of the night, the chef puts stuff in the discard bins. I asked if I could take the stuff that was going in the trash. Bread, rice, soup if there was any. Things that couldn't be kept. They said yes. Brenna made a note to verify that with the kitchen supervisor. She was fairly certain it would check out. And the staying late, she said. The sleeping in the corridor. He was quiet for a moment. Last bus east is 11:40, he said. If my shift runs late, I miss it. There's nothing until 5. You could have told Glen. Mr. Puffett has a lot to manage, Tobias said simply. Brenna looked at him for a long moment. Tobias, she said, why didn't you say anything? To anyone, he considered the question seriously. Not like someone scrambling for the right answer. Like someone who genuinely needed a moment to put the thing into words. Mims, Luella doesn't like a lot of attention, he said finally. She told me that early on. She said people look at her like she's a problem that needs solving. She doesn't want that. She just wants somebody to sit with her sometimes. He looked at Brenna. And I wasn't doing it to get credit. It's not really that kind of thing. Brenna sat back in her chair. It's not really that kind of thing. She had been in this industry for 30 years. She had read countless mission statements about hospitality, about care, about the human experience at the center of what hotels were supposed to provide. She had written a few of them herself. She had never heard it said more plainly than that. She gave herself one day to think. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to the Hargrove Grand's ownership group. She had a capital request she wanted approved. A small budget line item for a staff emergency transportation fund. Overnight employees who missed their last bus home could take a rideshare on the hotel's account, capped at a reasonable amount. She'd been meaning to propose it for 2 years. She proposed it now. It was approved before noon. The second call was to the city's outreach coordinator. Luella Marsh, Brenna said, the woman on the wait list for transitional housing. I'd like to make a donation to the program, specifically designated to move her up. What does that look like? There was a pause on the other end. You can do that, yes. It's not how it usually works, but if you want to make a contribution earmarked fee placement assistance and case coordination, we can absolutely work with you on that. Good, Brenna said. Let's talk numbers. The third call was to her catering manager. I want to formalize something, she said. The end-of-night food that goes to the discard bins. I want an official policy that any overnight staff member can take unspoiled food at end of shift. Document it, make it a program, not a gray area. Her catering manager was quiet for a second. Actually, that's a good idea. We throw away a lot. I know, Brenna said. She hung up. Then she asked her assistant to send Tobias a message. Ms. Caldwell-Holt would like to meet with you again tomorrow. Please come by at 9 a.m. He came back the next morning in the same clean sneakers, same careful stillness. He sat across from her desk and waited. Brenna looked at him. I want to offer you something, she said, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you respond. He nodded. We're launching a formal hospitality apprenticeship program here at the Hargrove Grand, beginning next quarter. It's a 2-year track. You complete your senior year and first year of community college on a flexible schedule while working 25 hours a week here, in rotating departments. Front desk, catering, operations, event coordination. At the end, you have a full-time management track offer if your performance merits it, and the hotel pays for 2 additional years of school. She paused. I don't have another candidate for the inaugural slot. I'd like you to be the first. Tobias didn't respond immediately. There's also a transportation stipend, she continued, effective immediately for current overnight staff, but you'll be moving to a day schedule under the apprenticeship, so the bus situation won't be an issue. He was very still, and Luella Marsh, Brenna said, has been connected with a caseworker who specializes in senior housing placement. I've made a contribution to the program that should move the process along. She's not a solution you need to worry about carrying alone anymore. She'll have people. Something shifted in his face then. Not a breakdown. Not tears. Just a release. The very quiet exhale of someone who had been holding something up for a long time by themselves and had just been told they didn't have to anymore. You didn't have to do any of that, he said. No, Brenna said. But I wanted to. She leaned forward slightly. Can I ask you something? He nodded. You're 17. You're working overnight shifts, riding buses at midnight, feeding a stranger out of leftover kitchen scraps. You've never said a word about any of it. Where did that come from? He thought about it for a moment. My grandma, he said. She always said, the measure of a person is what they do when nobody's watching and nobody's going to find out. He looked at his hands. She didn't always have a lot. We don't. But she was always doing something for somebody. Quietly. He glanced up. I guess I figured that was just what you do. Brenna didn't respond right away. She was thinking about Luella Marsh, 71 years old, sitting in a parking structure alcove with a cardboard floor, raising her hand in a small wave when she saw a teenager crossing an alley, with a foil-wrapped container of rice. You're the only one who comes. She didn't know if Luella had ever said those words to Tobias, but she suspected. Yes, Brenna said finally. That's exactly what you do. 3 weeks later, Tobias Webb started the Hargrove Grand's first ever hospitality apprenticeship. He showed up on the first day in a new shirt. Still simple, still plain, but new. He stood in the lobby with the quiet, unhurried posture of someone who was used to being underestimated and had long since made his peace with it. Glen Puffett passed him in the hallway that morning and stopped. Heard about the program, Glen said. Proud of you, son. Tobias nodded. Thank you, Mr. Puffett. Glen started to walk away, then turned back. You know, I felt real bad when I found out. About the bus, about you sleeping in the corridor. He shook his head. I should have asked, should have thought about it. You didn't know, Tobias said simply. Still, Glen said. Tobias looked at him. Mr. Puffett, honestly, it's okay. He said it in a way that landed, not dismissive, not letting anyone off the hook, just true. It was okay. He had made it okay, night after night, by showing up and finding a way. Glen nodded slowly and went on his way. Luella Marsh moved into a transitional housing unit in Midtown Memphis 7 weeks after Brenna made the call. The unit was small. 1 room, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a grab bar by the tub. But it had a window that faced east, and on the first morning, a caseworker reported she sat in the chair by that window for a long time watching the sun come up. She asked if she could write a note to the hotel that had helped her. The caseworker said of course. The note was 3 sentences. It arrived on Brenna's desk in a plain envelope with unsteady handwriting on the outside. I don't know who made this happen, but I want to say thank you. I spent a long time feeling like I had disappeared from the world, and somebody reminded me I hadn't. Brenna read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the top drawer of her desk, where she kept the things she wanted to remember. She sent a copy to Tobias. So here's what I want you to take from this. Tobias Webb wasn't doing what he did to be discovered. He wasn't keeping score. He wasn't waiting for someone to notice. He was 17 years old, working the night shift, missing the last bus home. And instead of being bitter about any of it, he was crossing an alley in the dark to make sure an old woman wasn't hungry. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to be the person his grandmother taught him to be. And here's the thing about that. Brenna Caldwell Holt was a smart woman, a sharp, experienced, paying attention woman. And she still almost missed it. She almost let 6 weeks of footage go unreviewed. She almost let Tobias clock out into the cold and Luella Marsh disappear into a wait list. Almost. The people doing the most important work in any building, in any community, in any family, are often the ones nobody's looking at. The ones in the gray uniform, the ones taking the last bus, the ones carrying something warm across an alley when they think nobody can see. Look for them, and if you're one of them, if you've been showing up quietly, doing the right thing with no audience, no recognition, no guarantee that any of it matters, I want you to know, it does. It always does. Even when nobody's watching. Especially then. If this story hit you somewhere real, leave a comment. Tell me about the Tobias in your life. The quiet one, the one who shows up. Like this video if you believe that everyday kindness is worth more than the world gives it credit for. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, welcome to Glen Stories. Subscribe, because we tell stories like this every week. I'll see you in the next one.